Howdy, everybody. Welcome back to Stranded Deep in Conversation, where I will do whatever I please, however I please, whenever I please, which is talk to you in this game on Thursdays. So, hope you're doing great, hope you're doing good, hope you're doing well, hope you're doing fantastic. I, myself, am doing pretty well. I mean, absolutely zero complaints there. So, yeah, I just things are going good. Uh, as I've mentioned before, since last week I have completely fucking redone everything. So I got the desk going now. I got the bed on the side here. I got a lot more room, so hopefully some more VR stuff will be coming. But yeah, just good stuff all around. The only thing I have to do is I have the TV on one side of my room. I'm gonna put it on the other in the side, the other part of the closet, just because that's more so where my bed is now. But other than that, everything's pretty much done. Yeah, so I'm hoping that I can start streaming some stuff because when the Pokemon game comes out on Friday, I'm off for work Sunday, so I'm gonna try to get something out then. But other than that, I mean, that's all the news I really got for you. So expect to see something on Sunday. So look forward to it, because I am. Hopefully it goes smooth. My internet kind of blows, so it might not go as smoothly as I would hope, especially if I'm doing it for a while, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. If anything, I can just play it for like hours and then just record that as like one big long-ass episode or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out when it gets there. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today we're here to talk, less talk, more rant slash self-debate. And this is going to be very in the style of disliking the moon, where I just have something on my chest that my friend were talking about, and it baffles my mind how in depth the conversation got, but yet no actual like understanding was made amongst either party. And this is about uh the final boss is what I'll call this one. The final boss, final in quotes, because that's what we were contemplating the entire time we were talking, is what makes a final boss the final boss. I have nothing written down, by the way, so I might triple over some subjects. So sorry in advance. But so there's for me and my friend that I talked about this with, there's two sides to the argument. There's my side, which is it is the last boss you fight in the game, the official last boss. Like if you're on a boss checklist, there is a boss at the end of that checklist. That is the final boss. My friend decrees that it's technically whichever boss is like the last boss you fight in like the main game, because he says that there's like a difference between main game and end game content, which can make sense. However, that doesn't mean that it is the last boss. The last boss, the final boss, because the final boss. Google defines final boss, and I know this because I copy pasted it to him. Coming at the end of a series. So coming at the end of a series, for me, means coming at the end of a game. Coming at the very end of the game, what is the thing that pops up at the end of the game? Which should be the final boss. And the main game that sparked this up was Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter World, I think it was, specifically. Because he's a big fan of Monster Hunter. He's trying to kill all the bosses. He's trying to perfect the game. So good luck to him. It's a tough game to perfect. So I'm very amazed that he's willing to do that. But either way, the main thing is that he was talking about the bosses, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, he's like, this one's fucking super hard. This one's pretty hard. I got to go do the final boss now. And I'm like, okay. Well, I mean, that sounds way more important and way harder than whatever like mini boss thing you were doing. And he's like, well, I mean, sure, the final, and like the final bosses are difficult. The final boss isn't that bad. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? The final boss, the final boss, so I can kind of get the idea of saying, oh, there's actually a true boss. But then there's the final boss. What? Where did someone... I don't understand. It genuinely confused me when he said that, which sparked a super long rant debate thing. It wasn't an argument, it was more a debate, because none of us got pissed off or anything. Which is surprising, because usually one of us eventually just starts fucking doing... Well, eventually one of us just doesn't really argue or debate, and more so just says shit, the same thing over and over again. But we actually had a decent conversation about this, which I'm very happy about. But holy moly, like just the idea of like a final boss, like hurt my brain so much. I was like, what are you talking about? Like it was just, I didn't understand. And he's saying like, yeah, there's the final boss, and then they added more bosses after that. And so now there's like technically the final boss from before is still the final boss, but there's like a final boss after that, and then a final boss after that, which makes no sense in like, at least for any other game. That doesn't make any sense at all. Haven't gotten to the end of Monster Hunter. It took me 4 hours to beat the first like two things. Like there's one bird that you have to fight in the beginning of the game. It took me like 3 hours to beat that thing. And then it took me another hour to beat some other thing that right after that. It took me fucking forever to beat those because I suck at that game, and I like using the horn. You can like combo stuff and like give yourself buffs and stuff because that's fun. That's just fun to me. But I suck at it, so it takes a while to kill anything. But the point is, for that game, I don't exactly. But I guess maybe he has a point because he says like, oh, and like there's the final boss, there's the final cutscenes, and after the cutscenes, there's more. It's like with Pokemon, how there's like a post game. He's saying that those bosses are for post game, which is like, okay, but that doesn't mean that the boss you just fought was the final boss, because there is still a boss to be fought in the post game. At the end, after that one, there is a post game for a reason. Yeah, like the post game. I guess the post game, I guess, either was added later or whatever, but oops, but it was still intended for a boss to be fought after that boss, which means that wasn't the final boss you just fought, because there's more. Like, I understand that it's like for like the main story, it can be like the last boss for the main story. It can be like one of the, but it's still not the final boss you fight in the game. That's when it's like there's like a specific like let's take Pokemon again, because I was just using Pokemon as an example. You've beat the Elite Four and the champion, but there is still like more to do after that. It's a post game, so it's not the final battle of the game. It's like the final battle of the story, but it's not the final battle of the game. Because I feel again, because it all comes down to like different subsections. Like if you can put everything into a list, whatever is at the bottom of that list is the final thing that you do. So like even if like with like Pokemon Alpha Sapphire, you beat the champion, but then you have to go and capture Deoxys, and Deoxys is technically like the last thing, the final capture, the final battle that you have with your team. That is the final thing you do, because after that, then it's like some credits and shit, and then it's actually over. The game is actually over. There's nothing more for you to do. That is the final boss of Alpha Sapphire. Even though it could technically be the champion, it literally is Deoxys, because that's the last thing you fight. That's the last thing that's the final fight that you have. And like, let's take another example. Terraria. Terraria is what I used when I was arguing with him a lot, because I don't exactly know Monster Hunter, but we both know Terraria. With Terraria, Moonlord is the final boss. It is the set final boss that once you fight Moonlord, you're done. That's the last boss you fight. That is the final boss of the game. There's something after it. You can fight other things after, but that is the final boss. But, right? Let's say you add a mod, the Calamity mod, so that which adds like a bunch of bosses after Moonlord. Moonlord then no longer becomes the final boss because it is not the last boss that you're meant to fight. If you have to fight a boss in order for it to unlock something that makes you fight another boss, that boss is no longer the final boss. And with Calamity mod, once you defeat Moonlord, you get certain ores and certain stuff that let you access like a dozen more bosses after Moonlord, which automatically makes it so that that is not the final boss. There is no more contention there. Moonlord is not the final boss, but he argued that it's just because it's the final boss in Terraria, but then for Calamity there's a final boss for Calamity, which is like, okay, sure, that can, I guess, since it's like modded content, it some people may not consider that to be the final boss, but then why would you play the modded content? It's modded Terraria. If you're playing Terraria in that session, the final boss for you is the last boss you're fighting, which will be in Calamity. If you're not playing it, then Moonlord would still be the final boss. But even if you're not doing modded stuff, as the game got, like updates and reworks and everything like that, the game added more bosses. At one point, Golem was the final boss. After you fought Golem, there wasn't much else to do. But then eventually they added bosses after Golem, and then they had Moonlord. When Moonlord came in, Moonlord was the final boss, the set final boss for the game. That made Golem no longer the final boss, despite it being the final boss before. It then became what my friend called, and what is a good thing to call it, a gatekeeper boss, because it keeps you from moving from progress. It keeps you from progressing the story and progressing the items you get and all that stuff. So, moving back into the Monster Hunter realm, if the final boss, if what he's naming the final boss, after you kill that, it then opens up more of the world and more of like end game story, so you can kill some more bosses after that. That means that final boss is clearly no longer the final boss because there's more after it. It unlocks more things. In that sense, that boss is like the Golem or the Plantera of these bosses, because if you fight Plantera, then you get the temple key, you can unlock Golem. You can unlock the world for Golem, and then after Golem you can do some more shit. With Monster Hunter, you fight that final boss that he's talking about, which I don't know the names of, but then after you do that, it unlocks this other section, so you can fight other bosses, which is essentially the Plantera Golem thing, except neither of those are the final boss now or anymore. It's Moonlord's the final boss now for Terraria, so the final boss that was added in as the final boss, the last thing that you fight in the game, is the final boss. However, a good point to be made, if my friend made, let me grab it because I don't want to misspeak. Final is final with all intents of being final. You do not have to do any of the end game. You still beat the game with that final boss. Which, sure, that makes sense, and that adds a very strange loophole sort of thing to the idea of final. Right? And this comes down to the technical term of final. Technically, you've beaten the main story after you fight that final boss. Like if you fight the champion in Pokemon, you've technically beaten the main story. However, that's not all the game has to offer. You can end on that boss and feel content, sure, but other people who continue to play the game know that there is more out there. If you played Alpha Sapphire and you never even heard of the Delta episode, and you just ended the champion, and you're like, and your friend's like, oh, did you do Delta episode? And you're like, no. And like, oh, so you didn't finish the game yet. That's just how it is. You haven't finished the game because you didn't do the end game content, which is still more, because then there's still more bosses to be fought. There's still big achievements, and especially with Alpha Sapphire's case, a free Deoxys to be had. It's crazy to me. It genuinely is crazy to me. But it's just, so yeah, like, sorry, I get lost in my thoughts very, very easily. But yeah, so in that sense, sure, that boss could be the final boss for you the player who was only there for that in order to get up to that boss, and then you're saying, all right, I'm done with the game, and you close it. That's fine. But it's not right. Literally, it's not literally the final boss, because technically for you, that boss was the final boss. The champion was the final boss. That final boss in Monster Hunter was the final boss for you. If I was in Terraria and I came in with the set goal of just fighting the Eye of Cthulhu and then ending my playthrough of the game, that fight with Eye of Cthulhu would be the final boss for that playthrough of the game, because that's the only boss that I had. That was the last boss I intended on fighting, and then after that, I stopped playing the game. I don't fight any more bosses. I don't fight any more anything. Eye of Cthulhu would have been the final boss for me. But in the same sense as with Pokemon as before, if someone tells you, hey, there's actually a lot more you can do after you fight the Eye of Cthulhu, like there's still more bosses to fight after that, then you technically didn't finish the game. You didn't beat the game. You didn't kill the final boss. But in your head, you did, because it's the final boss that you fought. So it could go back and forth. There's a literal definition of final, which is what my brain is like. Okay, that makes sense. That's right. Which is the actual final boss for the game. But then there's also the technical answer, which is just, hey, you know, whatever you end on is the last boss you fight, so is the final boss. For whatever reason, my friend couldn't understand that doesn't make it the actual final boss. Because endgame is meant for people who still want to play. And for those people who still want to play, believes it or not, they get to fight the final boss. It's like saying you went to an Avengers movie or a Marvel movie in theaters, and you didn't stay for the after credits little snippet. Everyone around you can say, oh yeah, I enjoyed that movie. I had a good time with that movie. I finished the movie. But in a sense, if you went into theaters and then that person, let's say you and your friend are at the movie, and one of you gets up as credits are ending to go take a piss and just wait outside, but you're like the fucking Marvel fanatic that you are, so you sit there for the next 7 minutes and wait for like a 30-second clip of just one of the characters talking at the screen for a little bit. Like, sure, you know? Like, what am I trying to say? Sorry, again, my thoughts fucking lose themselves very easily. Like, and when that friend, and you and your friend go to discuss the movie after that, both of you can say that you finished the movie, because he stayed for the ending, and he left. You stayed for the post-credits scene, and then left. So you literally speaking, not even just technically, you literally saw more movie. You saw the end of the movie, because after that scene, it was over. There was nothing left for you to watch. Unlike before, where there still was something for you to see, now there isn't. There's just no more movie. After that, you're done. The movie's over. So you could argue that he didn't see the entire movie. He didn't see the final scene because there was still something to see after credits. Obviously, it doesn't matter to everybody. So for them, they just take it on the chin. Like, okay, yeah, I mean, I didn't stay for it, but I didn't really care. I just wanted to watch the movie. You know, I didn't want to watch. I just wanted to watch the main movie. I didn't care about the last little end credits scene, which is completely fine and completely fair. Okay, you know what? Someone's vacuuming in my house. So I mean, if you hear that, then I'm sorry, but I just need to keep talking, or I'm going to lose my entire train of thought. But yeah, like you can. So both people are technically right, but one of them is literally right, and it's the person who stayed for the end credit scene, because that's just what the end is. The end credit scene, the scene after the credits. It's the final scene. Tubby, you son of a gun. Alright, so some more points. So, okay, so this is another fair point that he made. But they're the final boss, as we were talking about, like the actual, like the final boss, the first final that he said. They are the final boss. They are made to be the final. And they have the significance of one. But you can still fight those extra bosses. He's still the final one. Because you can fight those extra bosses, but he's still the final one. He's the one that was meant to be the final boss. Which is fine. And again, not wrong. But yeah, if there's anything after that boss, like, if you cannot fight something before fighting that final boss that he's saying, then you have not beaten the final boss. That final boss isn't the final boss because there's still more to be done after that because you just beat that boss. Like if you select which ones you want to fight, like the second boss in Terraria, you fight the Eye of Cthulhu first. Oh, actually, the first boss. The first boss could be Eater of Worlds, Scalatron, Eye of Cthulhu, King Slime. It all depends on where you want to start, because none of those bosses deviate which boss you can fight next. You could just jump straight to the Wall of Flesh. You could. So any of those could technically be your first boss. They can literally and technically be your first boss. But in order to beat the game, you have to kill the Moon Lord, because that's the last boss. You could say, oh, I only fought 3 bosses. I beat Wall of Flesh, Planetara, Golem, and then Moonlord. So you could say you beat 4 bosses. You can only really need to beat 4 bosses to beat the game. However, you need to beat Moonlord in order to say you beat the final boss. But then let's say you go back and play, like you beat Moonlord, and you still have all these bosses you haven't fought. And you're like, you know what? I want to fight them. So then you fight the Eye of Cthulhu, you fight King Slime, you fight Skeletron. Sorry, I'm just staring at this yucca tree. But, let's say you're fighting all these bosses after you've already taken down the final boss, the Moon Lord. Does that still make it the final boss? And again, this is where kind of my idea flips, because literally the last boss for that session, that playthrough, would be whatever boss you end on. But Moonlord is made to be the final boss, A, and B, you could still have fought those bosses before fighting Moonlord. If you couldn't fight the Eye of Cthulhu without beating Moonlord first, then I would say, yeah, that boss would be the final boss. But it's not, because there was no lead up to it. There was no, I need to beat this in order to get to this. And now that I beat this, there's nothing more to unlock after that. There's just no more bosses after that. With that said, right, literally, in that playthrough of the game, the last boss, the final boss, would be the boss that you just fought at the end of the game, the final boss. So that would be like, let's say you saved King Slime for last, you defeat King Slime. For you, King Slime was the final boss of the game. However, that's not how the game works. That's not what the game intends. And you can tell which one the final boss is, the one that the game intends to be the final boss, by can something be bought? Does something have to die in order for you? No. In order to know which one the final boss is, do you have to kill something before it? And is there something that has to be killed? Is there something that can be killed after you fight that boss? Because if you have to kill this boss in order to get to the next boss, then that's not the final boss. That's not the final boss at all. But if there's no other bosses after that boss, and you've already unlocked the ability to fight that boss, and now you're fighting it, and you can't, let's say with a game like Pokemon, all of the gyms, the gym battles, and the Elite Four, those, again, if you end after after you fight the 8th gym battle, or you fight the 3rd Elite Four member, sure, you've beaten the gyms and all that jazz, but you haven't beaten the champion, which is the final thing for that, for the pre-game. Because, sorry, again, I get very lost in my words. You have not beaten the thing after you've not beaten the thing you can beat after beating that thing you just did. If you stop at the 8th gym and you don't go to the Elite Four, Your final battle was the 8th gym, but there's still more to be fought after that. And even after the Elite Four, there's still the champion. Even after the Elite Four, you have the champion, there's the post game. Once you beat the last battle in the post game, that is all the game expects you to do. That's all the game has written for you to do. You could fight more things after that, so that technically isn't your final battle. But for the game itself, the final battle is the battle that can only be beat after everything else in the game has been beaten. Because otherwise, you can't access it. And then once you do it, and you can access everything you already were able to before, but that's it. You know, maybe a couple more items with with Terraria. You get Luminite. Oh boy. Yeah, I still, it's still just. What am I gonna do with it? There's no other bosses after that, which is why I love mods with Terraria, because especially with Moonlord, you get all this access to cool shit, but you have nothing to use it on except because you just want to kill Moonlord again. It's just a waste, which is why I think whenever a final boss is beat, that's just the end of me playing the game. There's no reason to fight Moonlord like 3 times over to get all the stuff I need for the cool weapons and accessories and items if I can't fight anything after it. Like, a final boss shouldn't drop anything but like a trophy saying, hey, you beat it, good job. Because there's no reason to have endgame content if there's nothing to do in endgame. You know, like the portal gun. When you first kill the Moonlord, the portal gun drops. That thing is so cool, but because you got it literally at the end of the game, there's no sense in needing it or using it or having it, and you only use it for like not even a tiny bit of you playing the game. So it's not nearly as fun or cool. The weapons and the items and the accessories and the armors that you love in Terraria are the ones you can access pretty early on, because you had enough time to get them and then use them and master them and enjoy them. If you get it at the end, it's not very exciting. This is a different topic, but it's just, I hate that. And with Pokemon, like, there's certain Pokemon that you can only really access towards the end of the game. There's certain Pokemon that you can only get in Victory Road, which is like, why? Because I want that Pokemon on my team. I saw I could get that Pokemon in the game, and now I realize I can only get it after I've already made my team and I've already grown with my team, and I just enjoy this team. Now you're telling me if I want to use a Pokemon I wanted to use when I started, I have to swap it for something else. Which is just, no. That's just mean. It's wrong. Like, the only way to stop that is to only use a certain amount of Pokemon. Like, let's say if I use 5 Pokemon for the entire game, and then Victory Road I can finally get my 6th. But where's the fun in that? You know? It's just odd. Like, I don't know. Like, if I'm playing the game just to win, sure. But if I'm playing the game to enjoy the experience, I want to enjoy the experience of the Pokemon that I've gotten throughout the game, not just at the end of the game. But again, that's a different topic for a different day, even though it does kind of overlap, but not that greatly. But overall, and like how he was saying with the Monster Hunter bosses, there's no story progress after killing them. You can fight like 3 other things. 2 are crossovers, 1 is an update boss. So what he's saying, from what I understand, is that, you know, those bosses, after you fight them, no other story is added. You know, they're just things you can fight, and then when you fight them, you say, hey, I beat them. And, like, one of them was an update boss, so, like, you know, it was updated into the game, so now there's a boss after that boss. That is exactly what a final boss should be. There shouldn't be any more upgrades or anything. There shouldn't be any crazy stuff, because a final boss is the final boss. Once you fight that boss, they don't expect you to look for more story or find more things to do. They expect you to just beat the boss and stop playing the game. Because that's all you can really do. Unless you're achievement hunting like he is, then there's more stuff you can do, so you kind of get a little confused as to why there's no extra stuff that they drop. But it makes sense if that's your stopping point, which the game expects you to do if you're not achievement hunting. Because that's the last boss. There's nothing else to gain, so there's no extra story, there's not a whole lot of extra, like, equipment. It's just the end of the game. That is the last boss. There's no story added after that because it is the final boss. It couldn't be the final boss if there was more story added, because then there'd be another boss, and then there'd be and more enemies you have to kill after it. So technically speaking, that is the final boss. Literally speaking, that is the final boss, because that is the last boss that they not only have you fought, but the game expects you to fight. And I don't know if there's much more I could say about it, to be honest with you, because I think it's pretty much. I'm looking through his. We did this all through text because I had to go to work. But yeah, it's just. It says the Wall of Flesh is the final boss of pre-hard mode. You cannot access hard mode without defeating him. Absolutely, but again, in the grand scheme of the game, that is not the final boss because there's something to do after it. You cannot access like the Destroyer unless you fight Wall of Flesh. So technically speaking, the Wall of Flesh cannot be, literally speaking, the Wall of Flesh cannot be the final boss. If you stop after the Wall of Flesh, like I did when I was a kid, because I sucked at hard mode and my base got hollowed immediately, then yeah, Wall of Flesh was the final boss for me. But after playing it again and realizing there's more after that, the final boss is whatever the final boss of the game is. That there's no more progression, there's nothing else to do. You can go back and fight other bosses and stuff. That's fine, but there's no new boss. There's no new area. There's no just for Moonlord. There's new items, but they don't matter because that's the final boss. There's nothing else for you to do with it except just get better at fighting older bosses. Which why would you need to do that? Because you've already beaten the game. There's no incentive to do it again. And with Calamity, the only point that I can kind of understand is the fact that when you mod a game, the technical still final boss for the game is the final boss they expect you to fight, which is Moonlord. But you can obviously have more bosses after that, which is yeah. But after that, that's the final boss that you're fighting because you're playing Calamity Terraria. You're no longer just playing Terraria, you're playing Calamity Terraria. So that final boss is the final boss of Calamity Terraria. I hope something here made sense. If you have a point that you would like to make about this, feel free to let me know. Because a lot could be said about this topic, because again, it swings both ways. Because literally speaking, the final boss is the last boss you fight in the game. Ever. Technically speaking, the last boss could be the last boss the game intends for you to fight. It could be the last boss you fight yourself because you either grew tired of the game or just assumed the game was over. The final boss could literally be any boss if you go through the technical standpoints. But literally speaking, there's only one final boss. Well, again, because literally, well, not really, now that I think about it, because literally speaking, the final boss is whatever boss you fight at the end, so that could be any boss. Technically speaking, could be the final boss. Any boss could be the final boss, either way you look at it, technically or literally. Which is interesting. So, for certain games, I use Terraria a lot. Let me know if you think there's a different answer for the final boss of Terraria or the final boss of X, Y, or Z. It is now morning in the game, I forgot to pause it. So with that said, I guess we will just call it there. So, again, if you have any other, interesting final boss arguments or debates, be happy to listen to them. So, with that said, thank you all for tuning in, and hope to see you all next time on Stranded Deep. That's how we say it. In conversation. That's right. Good for you. Bye now, y'all.